Howdy! For today's Jolly Lark, we're going to run through how to make some cool, mossy, verdant forest bases. We're going to focus on sculpting and creating the rounded, textured moss, and then you can add whatever bits and bobs you'd like on top. So one way you can do it is by mixing up a little bit of green stuff. I'm using an upside down base to just hold a little bit of green stuff in water to keep it wet, keep it easy to handle. It's a nice little trick for working with small bits of green stuff. And I'm just building up a little mound of green stuff, kind of pressing it flat on a base like so. The exact shape doesn't matter. Just kind of keep it lumpy and organic like that. Fingerprints doesn't matter because you're going to cover it with a texture to form those kind of mossy hillocks. Kind of glob it on there, whatever you think looks good. Do a variety. You can do this before or after you have your miniature on the base. I'll show you that with a miniature in a minute. So the other thing you can do if you don't like working with green stuff or if you don't have any is grab a hot glue gun and just kind of put some little blobs of hot glue on the base like so. And then what we're going to do to form the kind of very fine texture of moss is dip the hot glue in some snow flock. The snow flock is solid. It's not ground up foam like some other like green foliage is. So it works well to create fine grit textures. Once that hot glue has had a minute to cool down, you don't have to wait long. You just grab a hobby knife and pop off any little strings of hot glue that caught some of the texture. You can see how the different kind of lumps of moss are kind of connected. Just super easy. Give it a quick scrape to separate the different blobs of moss. If you're using green stuff, you're also going to want to get that snow texture on. I usually do that with a thin coat of super glue straight out of the bottle. Just super glue the top, dunk it on, good to go. Like before, you could do this before or after you have the miniature on the base. Either way works. That's kind of personal preference. If you've already got your miniature based up, totally fine to do this after. So method number 3 is to go ahead and put a textured paste onto the base before you add any moss. That's going to give you kind of a nice sub layer to work on top of, and a palette knife makes that quick and easy to spread on top of an empty base. If you've already got your miniature on your base, it's no problem. The palette knife works well for that too. You have to be a little bit more slow and careful when you're trying to work around a miniature's feet. This just happens to be another miniature that I was putting some texture on because I had already texturized all my tree people, but you get the idea. So once that textured paste is dry, then you can go back to the beginning of the video and use either hot glue or green stuff to build up some little mossy areas and then cover them with snow flock, just like we did on the bare base. Which way you prefer to work kind of is up to you. I think having tried both, I like the moss on top of the texture a little bit better. I think it represents a little bit better how moss grows on top of things. You get a little bit more separation, but it's really a toss-up of which one you prefer. Same deal if you're putting the moss on top of texture, pop some snow mixture on top. But here's what you're going to run into with this, is you're going to get some of the snow in the texture paste, but a big fat brush, you can just kind of sweep that off. Just be careful not to get any super glue on the brush bristles. You could also wait until the glue is fully dried to do that. If you put your moss down first, that's fine. And you can just add whatever texture you want to your base after the moss is dried. In this case, I'm using the Pro Acryl coarse basing medium, but any textured paint would work. All right, now that we've got our bases assembled, this really is pretty easy. We're going to paint them up using just 4 colors plus a base coat of dark brown. This is the Pro Acryl Dark Umber that I gave a quick base coat to, but any good solid dark brown will work. So to kick things off, we're putting on a coat of the Vallejo Game Color Heavy Dark Green, which is one of their kind of heavy-bodied paints that has a little bit better coating. I like this because you water it down a little bit to get it into all the textured areas, and it still maintains a nice solid green color, and it's a nice dark forest green, yeah, like so. So you're just kind of going to paint all the lumps of moss that you sculpted earlier with that dark green. If it's a little messy around the edges, that's fine. Moss is creepy in that it creeps, not that it's creepy like Halloween creepy. But anyway, point being, it's fine if it spills out a little bit onto the rocky texture that you've got. If those two textures end up kind of spilling in a little bit, that's fine. You can even go in and splash a little watered down green onto the brown areas to make the base look that much more kind of green and growing and verdant. As next step, I'm going to grab some Pro Acryl Golden Brown. It's a favorite color for basing. It looks good dry brushed lightly straight over a dark brown. Because we're going to go over with a bright green onto the mossy areas, again, it's okay if these colors blend a little bit at the transition points between them, just giving the dark brown a quick dry brush of the golden yellow to bring out the texture that's underneath the moss. It so doesn't matter whether or not these colors blend a little bit. You don't really even have to wait for the green paint to dry, but if you're batch painting these, the green paint probably will be dry by the time you're done. Now, if you're watching this video right when it's come out, you've got just a couple hours left to jump into the Kickstarter for the wooden handles that I'm using. They're super cool, they're comfortable, I've been really enjoying using them on all my recent painting projects. It ends on Friday, September 9th, so if you're watching this video a little bit later, you might still be able to jump in for a late pledge. But yeah, just super comfortable. I've been really, really happy with how these handles turned out, and I'm really delighted to put all my miniatures on them. So a lot of people already have their miniatures glued onto their bases, which is cool. You can see here it's also not a problem to just go ahead and paint that base once the miniature is fully painted. No big deal. So a light dry brush of Pro Acryl Bright Ivory or any sort of a bone color is next. And this is super light. I am avoiding the moss on here because I want to save the brightest color on the moss for the bright green. Just a little light dry brush of the bone on the edges looks good. And then finally, the brightest green I've got in my paint collection that isn't a fluorescent, neon paint is the Vallejo Game Color Livery Green. And just giving this a nice light dry brush over the tops of the moss, and you'll see that texture of the snow flock really picks up a dry brush well, and you get a nice kind of natural fade with the moss being a little brighter on top. You can go in with a heavier dry brush right on the top of the hill. It'll give it a little bit more an appearance of a curve or kind of natural look. And there you go. These are super easy, super fast to paint. You'll see these featured on all the miniatures in an upcoming speed painting Sylvaneth video that I'm working on, because these are just really fast to do. I really like how they look. So any questions about how this works or materials I use, feel free to hit me up in the comments below. You can go as heavy as you want on the top, even going up to a really almost solid bright green on the very most raised parts, like so. Looks pretty good, I think. You still get a little bit of that texture. And this is probably not a model railroaders technique, but I think it fits the sort of overemphasized, exaggerated sculptures that we like so much in miniature wargaming. Once you've got all your texture and your moss painted up, you really can add any sort of additional elements you want. On some of the larger models in this army, I added some painted gravel, some extra tree branches. There's lots of different places that sell miniature dried leaves. Scattering some dried leaves on the bases looks pretty good. I'll pop a couple links down below if you're interested in stuff like that. So I'm going to finish these off with a couple of grass tufts and a couple of flower tufts. These are both from Tajima 1, my preferred sticky tuff supplier. It just kind of adds even a little bit more texture, variety. When you're walking through a forest trail, there's just all sorts of different plants and textures on the ground around you. Final step is paint those base rims. I always go with whatever the darkest color that appears on the base is. In this case, the dark umber, but whatever suits your fancy there. And there you go. I think that's a fun, fast, easy, cool basing scheme that's appropriate for any forest dwelling army. So if you have any questions about the process, hit me up in the comments. I appreciate you watching, appreciate you subscribing, checking out the Handles Kickstarter, and we'll see you next time for another Jolly Lark.